You know those picture-perfect suburbs where every lawn looks like it's been vacuumed and the houses are all cloned from the same catalog? That's Maplewood Estates in rural Ohio for you. White picket fences, smiling families waving from minivans, and an HOA board that ran the place like it was their own little kingdom. On the surface, it was the American dream. Underneath, it was a pressure cooker of ridiculous rules, whispered rumors, and one woman who thought she owned the whole damn zip code. That woman was Cynthia Hargrove, Cindy to her friends, the dictator to everyone else. She was the HOA president, a real estate shark with a smile sharper than her stiletto heels. Always in designer suits that cost more than most people's car payments, clipboard in hand like it was the Ten Commandments. Her husband Derek owned Hargrove Construction, the company that built half the neighborhood. Together, they had the kind of local power that made county officials nervous. Right in the middle of all this cookie-cutter perfection sat my neighbor Ethan Caldwell's 35 acres. Ethan was your average good guy, 59, retired Navy vet turned auto mechanic. Widowed a few years back after losing his wife to cancer, he kept to himself restoring old tractors and tending a small vegetable patch. The crown jewel? His grandfather's old red barn, built in 1955. Hand-cut oak beams, solid as the day it was raised. It wasn't just a building. It was where Ethan's grandpa taught him to fix engines as a kid, where family Thanksgiving dinners happened in the loft, where he and his late wife Sarah had their first dance on their wedding night. That barn smelled like motor oil, hay, and memories that no amount of money could replace. Ethan's land had agricultural exemptions from way before the developers showed up. Legally, the HOA couldn't touch it. But Cindy didn't care about legally. She saw that barn as an eyesore ruining her perfect view and, more importantly, her property values, and her secret plans to expand development into a fancy golf course community. It started small. One crisp fall morning, Ethan was under his old John Deere when those familiar heels clicked up the gravel drive like incoming artillery. "Mr. Caldwell," Cindy purred, voice sweet as antifreeze. "We need to talk about that structure on your property." Ethan wiped his hands on a rag, squinting up at her. "Morning, Cindy. You mean my grandpa's barn? What's the problem?" "It's visible from 17 homes in the estates," she said, gesturing dramatically. "It doesn't meet community aesthetic standards. It's hurting everyone's investments. We have standards here in Maplewood." Ethan chuckled softly. "Standards? Ma'am, that barn was here decades before your McMansions. It's grandfathered in. HOA rules don't apply to my agricultural land." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes went dead cold. "There are creative ways to handle eyesores that affect the community, Mr. Caldwell. I hope you won't make this difficult." That creative ways line gave Ethan chills. He knew trouble when he heard it. But he didn't snap back. He just nodded politely and went back to his tractor. Later that night, he told me over a beer in his garage, "Let her swing the bat, neighbor. I'm just going to keep score." The first fines arrived in the mail 2 weeks later. Visual pollution, $2.50. Unauthorized equipment storage, $1.75. Then anonymous complaints to code enforcement about noise from farm machinery and potential rodent issues. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't fight back immediately. He just started recording every interaction on his phone, quietly noting dates, times, and the exact wording of every notice. "Let them dig their hole," he told me one afternoon over coffee. "I'm just making sure the shovel is big enough." Meanwhile, other neighbors were feeling the squeeze too. Young mom Sarah Jenkins got fined $300 for her kid's basketball hoop being up after 7 p.m. Old Mrs. Patterson, 78, got cited for hanging laundry on a line, inconsistent with neighborhood character. A veteran down the street named Mike got violation after violation for parking his truck in his own driveway. Cindy's husband's construction crews even accidentally blocked driveways during routine maintenance. It was classic Karen power trip, weaponizing community standards to control everyone while Cindy lived in the biggest house with the most unpermitted additions that somehow never got inspected. The tension was building like a storm over those perfect lawns. You could feel it in the air at neighborhood barbecues, people whispering about Cindy, avoiding her gaze, but too scared to speak up. Ethan watched it all, sipping his beer, smiling that quiet smile of a man who had faced worse in the Navy and was waiting for the right moment. Little did Cindy know, her first creative solution was about to light a fuse that would burn her whole empire down. Word count, 1,000. The complaints kept piling up like snow in a blizzard. By mid-October, Ethan had received 14 separate violation notices in a single week. Code Enforcement Officer Dale showed up one Thursday morning, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, clutching a clipboard thick enough to stop bullets. "Mr. Caldwell," Dale stammered. "I've got a complaint here about noise ordinances, dust control, potential rodent harboring." Ethan just leaned against his barn door, arms crossed, recording on his phone like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Dale, how many of those complaints came from the same address on Maple Lane?" Dale's face went pale. I can't say, sir." Ethan smiled that calm Navy smile. "You don't have to. I already know. Tell Cindy I said hello, and remind her that Ohio's Right to Farm Act exists for a reason." Dale practically ran back to his truck. That same afternoon, Ethan got a call from Cindy herself. "Mr. Caldwell," she hissed through the phone, "I understand you've been interfering with legitimate community enforcement." Ethan's voice stayed even. "Cindy, I've simply documented your systematic abuse of county resources for personal harassment." "Personal harassment?" Her laugh could have shattered glass. "Mr. Caldwell, you're clearly struggling to understand how civilized communities function. People who insist on being difficult neighbors often discover that their problems tend to multiply exponentially." Ethan let the silence hang for a beat. "And I think you're about to learn that some people's problems have a way of becoming everyone else's solutions." He hung up. Then he went inside and added the call recording to his growing digital file folder labeled simply Cindy's Greatest Hits. The neighbors started noticing Ethan wasn't cracking. Sarah Jenkins stopped by one evening with a plate of cookies and a stack of her own violation notices. "She fined me for chalk on the sidewalk, Ethan." "Washable chalk. My 5-year-old drew hopscotch." "Who does that?" Ethan listened, nodded, and quietly scanned every notice into his file. "Keep every single one, Sarah. One day we might need them." Mrs. Patterson brought over her laundry citations. Mike the veteran showed up with photos of his truck tickets. Word was spreading. The old sailor in the barn wasn't rolling over. Cindy's empire was starting to feel cracks. But Cindy doubled down. Her second wave came 10 days later in the form of a lawsuit demanding the barn be demolished for safety reasons and $50,000 in diminished property values. Ethan read the papers at his kitchen table while his coffee went cold, then laughed until his ribs hurt. Terrorist concealment opportunities in a corn barn in Ohio? Really, Cindy? He didn't hire some fancy lawyer right away. He just kept filming, kept logging, kept waiting. The utilities started acting funny. Power outages that only hit his property, water pressure dropping to a trickle. His security cameras caught a white Mercedes cruising past at 2 a.m. with vanity plate hoking. Cindy's car. Still, Ethan stayed patient. He told me one night while we sat in the barn loft looking at old photos of his grandpa. "She thinks she's breaking me. What she doesn't know is I spent 20 years in the Navy learning how to outlast storms." The whole neighborhood was holding its breath. People were scared to put out flags, scared to park cars, scared to live. Cindy had turned Maplewood into her own little police state. And Ethan? He was the quiet storm gathering on the horizon. You could almost hear the clock ticking. Word count, 1,000. Then came the night everything changed. At 3:17 a.m. on a cold November Tuesday, Ethan woke to the smell of smoke. He looked out the window and saw his grandfather's barn glowing orange. 70 years of family history, beams his grandpa cut by hand, the loft where he proposed to Sarah, the workbench where he taught his kids to change oil, was burning like a Viking funeral. Ethan stood there in his pajamas, watching flames eat memories, and felt something cold and focused click into place. The same focus he had when his ship took fire in the Gulf. He grabbed his phone, called the fire department, and then quietly checked his security system. The footage was crystal clear. At 2:14 a.m., 3 minutes before the outage, Cynthia Hargrove's white Mercedes had slowed to a crawl right beside the barn. A figure in dark clothes got out, poured something, lit a match. The plate hoking glowed in the infrared like a neon sign. Ethan didn't scream. He didn't call the sheriff. He just saved the file, backed it up to 3 different clouds, and whispered, "Gotcha." The next morning, while firefighters hosed down the smoldering ruins, Ethan started digging deeper. He pulled county records online. Public access, nothing fancy. What he found made his blood run cold. Buried in the original HOA incorporation papers, Section 47C, was a clause giving the HOA first right of refusal on any non-conforming properties within 2 miles, at 60% of assessed value. Every fine, every complaint, every sabotage was designed to make his life hell until he sold cheap. And guess whose company held options on every surrounding acre? Hargrove Development Solutions, Derek's firm. Cindy wasn't just protecting property values. She was running a land grab operation worth millions. But the real twist hit when Ethan's old Navy buddy Marcus Rodriguez, who lived 3 houses down, showed up at dawn with a flash drive. "I was Cindy's assistant for 6 months before she fired me. She made me file half those fake complaints. And she bragged about the barn, said one creative solution would solve everything." Marcus had recorded conversations. Cindy's voice, crystal clear, "That eyesore barn is the last piece. Burn it, blame vandals, and the old man will fold." Ethan stared at the footage, the records, the audio. Then he smiled for the first time since the fire. "Marcus, how do you feel about testifying in federal court?" The neighborhood exploded with quiet support. Sarah brought more stories. Mrs. Patterson brought every citation. Mike brought photos of Cindy's own unpermitted pool house that somehow never got fined. Ethan's daughter, now a civil rights attorney in Columbus, drove down that afternoon. "Dad, this is textbook conspiracy plus arson. We're going federal." Ethan didn't rush. He let Cindy think she'd won. She even showed up at his driveway 2 days later with a $400,000 cash offer for the land, to help you move on after this tragedy. Ethan just looked at her, phone recording in his pocket. "Cindy, you once told me there were creative ways to solve community problems. Turns out you were right. Though I don't think federal prison was what you had in mind." She laughed it off and drove away in her Mercedes. But the noose was already tightening. Ethan and his daughter spent the next weeks turning his garage into a war room. FBI agent Sarah Kowalski, an old contact from a Navy case years ago, showed up after seeing the arson footage. "This isn't just local vandalism, Mr. Caldwell. This is arson of protected agricultural property, plus a pattern of civil rights violations. Your recordings, Marcus's audio, the HOA clause, they're building a RICO case." Neighbors poured in with evidence. Sarah Jenkins had secretly recorded Cindy threatening her job at the county hospital. Mrs. Patterson had bank statements showing fines that went straight to Cindy's personal account. Mike the veteran had texts from Derek offering help if he pressured Ethan to sell. Cindy's retaliation got desperate. She tried to have Ethan's property taxes reassessed. She sent code officers to condemn his garage. She even spread rumors on the neighborhood Facebook page that Ethan was unstable and hoarding dangerous materials. But every attack just added more evidence. Then came the whistleblower jackpot. Cindy's former bookkeeper, terrified after seeing the arson footage on local news, contacted Ethan's daughter. She had financial records showing Cindy personally owned millions in stock in the development company that stood to gain hundreds of millions once Ethan's land was cleared. Ethan stayed calm through it all. He rebuilt a small temporary shed on the barn site using scrap lumber, symbolic, quiet defiance. Every hammer strike was a reminder. Neighbors started leaving flowers and cards at the charred ruins. The community was waking up. Cindy called one last time. "Ethan, this has gone far enough. Drop the nonsense and sell. We can make all your problems disappear." Ethan's reply was ice. "Cindy, my problems are already gone. Yours are just starting." The final straw was when Cindy tried to get Ethan committed for mental instability using a bought-off doctor. The commitment papers were delivered by a deputy who looked terrified when he saw the FBI van parked in Ethan's driveway. Agent Kowalski just smiled. "Tell your boss the game's over." By now the whole county was watching. Local news picked up the story. Reporters camped outside Cindy's mansion. The pressure was crushing her empire. Word count, 1,000. The monthly HOA meeting at the community center had never seen a crowd like this. 400 people packed a room built for 200. Cameras everywhere. Ethan walked in carrying a charred piece of his grandpa's barn beam in an evidence bag. The symbolism wasn't subtle. Cindy called the meeting to order, voice dripping fake concern. Before we start, I want to address these baseless rumors being spread by certain difficult residents. Ethan stood up in the back. Actually, Cindy, the community would like to hear about your creative solutions. Agent Kowalski rose beside him, badge flashing. FBI Special Agent Sarah Kowalski. This meeting is now part of a federal investigation. The room went dead silent. Cindy's face drained of color. Ethan walked to the front, plugged in his laptop, and projected the evidence. Arson footage of her Mercedes, the secret HOA land grab clause, Marcus's recordings, financial trails, every neighbor's story. You thought burning my family's history would break me, Ethan said, voice steady but carrying decades of Navy command. What you actually did was hand the FBI the keys to your entire criminal enterprise. Cindy tried to scream, "This is outrageous," but Agent Kowalski was already reading her rights. Handcuffs clicked. Derek was arrested in the parking lot. County officials who'd taken bribes started flipping on camera. The crowd erupted in cheers. Sarah Jenkins hugged Ethan. "Mrs. Patterson cried. Mike the veteran saluted. Marcus just whispered, "We're free." 6 months later, the new barn rose on the same spot, bigger, stronger, built by volunteers from the entire neighborhood. Cindy was serving 12 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to arson, conspiracy, mail fraud, and civil rights violations. Her assets were seized. The HOA was reformed with term limits and real transparency. Maplewood Estates finally felt like a community again. Ethan stood in the new loft one evening, watching the sun set over fields that would soon grow corn. He scattered Sarah's ashes there like she'd always wanted. Then he looked at me and smiled. "Sometimes the quiet ones win, neighbor. All you gotta do is keep score." And that, folks, is how one man's patience and a whole lot of evidence brought down the queen of the suburbs. If you've got your own HOA nightmare, drop it in the comments. Justice is out there. You just gotta be willing to wait for it.